What hygiene was like throughout history? How bad was it? We all know what Roman emperors looked like from statues and coins, but have you ever wondered what they actually smelled like? Or how Versailles nobles, cowboys, and astronauts really kept clean, or didn't? Get ready for some jaw-dropping, bizarre, and downright shocking secrets about hygiene through the ages. Which era do you think was the dirtiest? Stick around, you might never look at history the same way again. Roman emperors, appearances, and hygiene. Let's take a trip back to ancient Rome, a world of power, ambition, and some serious personal grooming standards. When we think of Roman emperors, we imagine grand marble statues and stern faces on ancient coins, but behind the scenes, these powerful men were just as obsessed with their appearance as any celebrity today. Start with Julius Caesar, the man who changed the course of history. Sure, he was a brilliant general and a political genius, but did you know he was also a bit of a trendsetter? In the early days of Rome, long hair and beards were all the rage for men. But Caesar wasn't a fan of the shaggy look. He preferred a cleaner, more polished style. Short hair, clean-shaven, always neatly groomed. Thanks to his influence, this look quickly caught on in the upper circles of Roman society. Suddenly, every ambitious Roman man wanted to look like Caesar. But here's a very human twist. Caesar actually had a big insecurity. He was going bald, and he hated when people made fun of his thinning hair. Roman historian Suetonius tells us that Caesar was meticulous about his looks. He'd pluck out stray hairs and kept what he had carefully combed, but the receding hairline bothered him so much that he developed a clever solution, the classic comb-over. He'd sweep the remaining hair forward from the back of his head, trying to disguise the bald spots. And perhaps the best perk of being emperor? He could wear a laurel wreath whenever he wanted. That wasn't just for style, it doubled as a crown and a handy cover for his thinning hair. And Caesar wasn't alone. Later emperors, just as self-conscious, took their own approaches to hide their imperfections. Emperor Domitian was so worried about his hair loss that he ordered all his official portraits to show him with a full head of hair. When that wasn't enough, he resorted to wearing wigs. Even Emperor Hadrian, famous for reintroducing the beard, likely did so to hide facial blemishes. Personal grooming wasn't just about hair. Emperors stressed over breakouts too. Roman doctors wrote entire texts about treating acne, boils, and other common woes, emphasizing oils, herbal remedies, and sometimes strict diets. For emperors, image was everything. A pimple or a patch of missing hair might not change the course of history, but it certainly shaped how these men wanted to be remembered. Flawless, powerful, and, above all, admired. Roman bathing practices, from Strigils to Thermae. Step into the daily life of ancient Rome, and you'll quickly discover that public baths weren't just about getting clean. They were at the very heart of Roman society. Forget the modern idea of a quick shower behind closed doors. For the Romans, bathing was a ritual, a social event, and a true mark of civilization. Imagine walking through the stone streets of Rome as the sun sets, the city buzzing with activity. Instead of heading home, people of every class, from senators to merchants to everyday laborers, make their way to the Thermae, the grand bathhouses that dominated the city's skyline. These weren't simple pools. The largest Thermae were sprawling complexes, complete with hot and cold baths, saunas, exercise yards, libraries, and even gardens. But how did a Roman actually get clean? It all started with oil, not soap. Bathers would slather their skin with olive oil, working it in until they were slick and shiny. Then came the strigil, a small, curved metal tool that looked a bit like a tiny sickle. With practiced movements, the Romans would scrape the oil, sweat, and dirt right off their skin. All of it collected into a little pot, leaving them refreshed and, by ancient standards, remarkably clean. For the wealthy, this entire process was a luxurious affair, performed by slaves or attendants skilled in the art of bathing. For everyone else, it was a do-it-yourself operation, but still an essential part of the day. Romans believed that bathing wasn't just about hygiene, it was also about health, relaxation, and connecting with others. The Thermae themselves were marvels of engineering, with sophisticated heating systems, called hypocausts, that kept the floors and water warm. Visitors would move from room to room. The tepidarium with its mild, warm waters, the caldarium, where hot steam rose thick in the air, and finally the frigidarium, a bracing cold plunge to close out the ritual. Some bathhouses even offered open-air pools or gymnasiums for exercise, making the visit a full-body experience. The baths were bustling places. Friends met to gossip, business deals were struck in the steamy haze, and news from across the empire traveled quickly along marble benches. For a Roman, skipping a visit to the bath was almost unthinkable. Here, personal cleanliness went hand in hand with social status, a daily ceremony that left every participant feeling not just cleaner, but truly Roman. Roman toilets and sanitation, public versus private. When it comes to ancient Rome, there's no denying the city was ahead of its time in many ways. But their approach to sanitation might still surprise you. While the Romans gave the world aqueducts, heated floors, and paved roads, their bathroom habits were, well, a little less glamorous. Step into a bustling Roman city, and you'll quickly notice that privacy wasn't exactly a top priority when nature called. Public toilets, known as latrines, were scattered throughout towns, especially near markets, bathhouses, and busy streets. These weren't the solitary stalls we're used to today. Instead, they were long stone benches, side by side, each with holes carved out at regular intervals. Underneath ran a channel of flowing water to whisk waste away, but there were no dividers or doors. Picture yourself sitting shoulder to shoulder with friends, neighbors, or complete strangers, chatting as you went about your business. As for toilet paper, Romans took a different approach altogether. Each public latrine was equipped with a communal sponge attached to a stick, called a tersorium, resting in a bucket of water or vinegar. After use, it was rinsed and left for the next visitor. It's a far cry from our modern standards, but for the Romans, it was just a part of daily life. The wealthy, of course, had more comfortable options. In the grand villas of Rome's elite, private toilets were a mark of luxury. Marble seats, elaborate plumbing, and even footrests transformed a basic necessity into something almost regal. Some emperors, like Hadrian, went so far as to install multiple private toilets throughout their sprawling estates, showing off not just wealth, but a desire for personal comfort in every corner of daily life. When it came to keeping clothes clean, the Romans showed their resourcefulness, though their methods might raise a few eyebrows today. Laundry workers or fullers used a surprising ingredient: urine. Collected from public urinals, both human and animal urine was prized for its ammonia content, which helped break down grease and dirt in clothing. Clothes would soak in the solution, be stomped on, rinsed, and then hung out to dry in the sun. Roman sanitation systems weren't perfect. Public latrines could get pretty foul, and sharing cleaning tools certainly carried its risks. But their innovations laid the foundation for citywide sewer systems and communal hygiene. Despite the quirks, these practices showed just how advanced and inventive the Romans really were in their quest to keep their cities running, and their citizens mostly clean. Which fact about the way people stayed clean in the past completely surprised you? Hair today, gone tomorrow. Roman emperors and their hair. In the world of Roman emperors, every detail of appearance mattered, but nothing sparked as much anxiety or creativity as a receding hairline. While power and prestige were always on display, a full head of hair was the secret crown every emperor seemed to desire. In fact, worries about thinning hair and bald spots were just as real in ancient Rome as they are today. Take Emperor Domitian, for example. As a young man, he started losing his hair early, and it quickly became his biggest insecurity. Far from accepting his fate, Domitian went on the defensive. He insisted that all official portraits, coins, and statues depict him with a glorious mane, regardless of what was happening on his actual scalp. The reality: behind the scenes, Domitian was constantly searching for ways to cover up his hair loss. When portraits weren't enough, he turned to wigs, an early adopter of hairpieces long before they became fashionable. This preoccupation with hair wasn't limited to Domitian. Many emperors obsessed over their appearance, especially when it came to hair. Julius Caesar, too, famously hid his baldness with clever comb-overs and his beloved laurel wreath. For emperors, controlling their image meant controlling their legacy. Every curl or lock sculpted on a statue was a subtle statement of youth, strength, and authority. Even everyday Romans took their cues from the palace. When Caesar made the clean-shaven look popular, barbershops flourished across the empire. And when beards came back into style, thanks in part to Emperor Hadrian, who wore one to cover facial blemishes, the trend caught on like wildfire. Being hair-conscious wasn't just a royal quirk. It shaped grooming habits for everyone, from soldiers to senators. The lengths to which emperors went to maintain a youthful look reveal just how much image shaped perceptions of power. Roman historians loved to gossip about these personal details, knowing that a ruler's reputation could hinge on something as simple as a receding hairline. Even with all the resources of an empire, emperors still faced the universal fear of losing their hair, and did everything they could to keep up appearances. Every statue with lush curls, every carefully designed coin, was more than just art. It was an act of image management, an ancient attempt to outsmart time, and proof that even the most powerful men in history had their moments of self-doubt when they looked in the mirror. Dining with Roman emperors, from gluttony to good taste. The dining table was more than just a place to eat in ancient Rome. It was a stage where emperors revealed their personal tastes, quirks, and sometimes their deepest flaws. While the Roman Empire was known for its power and military might, life inside the palaces could be surprisingly intimate, dramatic, and even outrageous, especially at dinner. Take Emperor Augustus, the man who led Rome into a golden age. Despite his enormous power, Augustus was a model of restraint when it came to food. He preferred simple, honest meals, a piece of bread, some cheese, perhaps a few olives or dried fruit. Historians describe him as a man who believed in moderation. Guests at his table would rarely see extravagant feasts. Instead, Augustus set the tone for dignified, wholesome dining, and expected his friends and family to follow his example. But not every emperor could resist temptation. Fast forward to the reign of Claudius, and the scene is almost unrecognizable. Claudius had a reputation for his legendary appetite. He loved to eat and drink at any time, in any place. Banquets under his rule were elaborate affairs, with tables groaning under the weight of exotic dishes, rare meats, seafood, fruits, and wines from across the empire. Stories circulated of the emperor eating through the night, sometimes even falling asleep at the table only to wake up and resume his meal. Guests could never be sure what to expect. A modest supper or a wild, endless feast that tested even the hardiest stomachs. Food in the imperial courts wasn't just about nourishment, it was about power, status, and even political maneuvering. A dinner invitation from the emperor was a high honor, but it came with its own challenges. One wrong move, eating too little, indulging too much, or breaking social customs, could land you on the wrong side of the ruler's favor. Dinners also became showcases for new culinary trends and extravagant tastes. Wealthy Romans prized delicacies like flamingo tongues, dormice stuffed with herbs, and honey-glazed fruits. Meanwhile, chefs competed to invent ever more spectacular dishes, hoping to win the emperor's approval and a place in history. Whether humble or hedonistic, the emperor's table reflected his personality and ambitions. Each meal was a performance, each guest an actor. The choices made at dinner, what to eat, how much to serve, who to invite, could shape friendships, fuel rivalries, and even decide the fate of Rome itself. The Black Death, hygiene, and misconceptions in the 14th century. Travel back to the 14th century Europe and you'll find a world teetering on the edge of disaster. The streets are crowded, filth piles up along alleyways, and the air is thick with the stench of waste and unwashed bodies. Few people truly understood what it meant to be clean. And this ignorance set the stage for one of the deadliest pandemics in human history, the Black Death. In those days, most Europeans had little idea how diseases actually spread. The leading theory? Blame it on bad smells. According to the popular Miasma theory, foul odors drifting through the city were believed to be the root of sickness. People stuffed fragrant herbs into pouches, hung them around their necks, or placed them in their homes, hoping these sweet scents would shield them from deadly plagues. Unfortunately, these desperate measures did nothing to halt the invisible killers carried by fleas and rats. As the Black Death swept across the continent, killing tens of millions, fear gripped every household. Hygiene, already neglected, became even more precarious. With no plumbing, human and animal waste piled up in the streets, turning cities into breeding grounds for disease. Floors inside homes were often covered with rushes or straw, which trapped dirt, food scraps, and worse, creating havens for pests. People rarely changed these floor coverings, allowing fleas, lice, and rats to multiply in the very places where families slept and ate. Some communities, however, fared slightly better. Historians have noted that Jewish populations in certain areas suffered fewer deaths from the plague. Why? Many now believe it was due to religious traditions that emphasized regular hand washing and stricter rules about cleanliness. Tiny measures that, unknowingly, offered a bit of protection. The panic and confusion of the era led to bizarre treatments. Medieval doctors prescribed bloodletting and strange potions, but nothing seemed to work. Even the dead were considered contagious, leading to hurried burials and widespread terror. People didn't need microscopes to realize that the disease was spreading rapidly. They just lacked the tools to fight back effectively. Out of this darkness, however, came a few unexpected changes. The staggering loss of life forced societies to rethink labor, wages, and even the rights of peasants. In the end, the Black Death was a grim lesson about the dangers of poor sanitation and the high cost of ignorance. But it also pushed Europe slowly toward a new understanding of public health, paving the way for scientific revolutions yet to come. Thank you for watching. Comment 1 if you're staying for more wild history. The Sun King's Court. Hygiene at Versailles in the 17th century. Step inside the dazzling halls of Versailles, and it's easy to be swept away by gold leaf, sparkling chandeliers, and endless mirrors. But behind all that royal splendor, court life under King Louis XIV, better known as the Sun King, wasn't nearly as glamorous as it looked. In fact, when it came to hygiene, Versailles was a palace built on luxury and a surprising amount of filth. Bathing, as we know it, was actually viewed with suspicion. Many people, including the king himself, believed that soaking in hot water could weaken the body or open the pores to disease. So, while the palace overflowed with perfume and powder, actual baths were rare events. Louis XIV reportedly preferred to wipe himself down with linen towels dipped in alcohol or scented water. Daily routines included changing into fresh clothes, sometimes several times a day, dabbing on generous amounts of perfume, and always being careful to wash the hands and face. For the Sun King, a spritz of cologne or a scented handkerchief was often considered cleaner than a tub of water. Privacy in Versailles? Nearly non-existent. The royal court was a world of constant attention and activity, where even personal needs were public. Many courtiers used chamber pots in their rooms, but there were also public latrines scattered throughout the palace, hardly places of comfort or dignity. With so many people living, working, and gossiping in close quarters, unpleasant odors became part of everyday life. Travelers and diplomats frequently wrote about the overwhelming stench that clung to Versailles, no matter how many bouquets of flowers or bowls of potpourri tried to mask it. And then there were the pests. The Grand Palace, originally built on swampy ground, was a paradise for fleas, lice, and mice. Cats roamed the halls in an attempt to keep the rodent population in check. The color puce, a kind of purplish brown, actually got its name from the French word for flea, inspired by the dark marks these insects left on fabric and furniture. Even the food reflected Versailles' hygiene struggles. Kitchens were overrun with servants, animals, and pests. Food poisoning and dental disasters were commonplace. Louis XIV lost all his teeth by the end of his life, leading him to favor soft foods. King Louis XIV made Versailles the ultimate symbol of royal might, a glittering stage where Europe's elite gathered in awe of absolute power. Beneath all that splendor, however, courtiers spent each day walking a tightrope between outward elegance and the not-so-glamorous realities of pungent odors, hidden pests, and constant discomfort. Victorian era, from miasma theory to early feminine hygiene. Victorian England was a time of grand progress and peculiar habits, a world straddling the old ways and the new. On the surface, it was an age of scientific breakthroughs, elegant fashion, and strict social manners. Yet, beneath the polished veneer, the Victorian obsession with cleanliness often led to some truly unusual and sometimes hazardous hygiene routines. For many Victorians, the battle against disease was fought not with knowledge of germs, but with a nose for foul odors. The dominant belief, known as the Miasma theory, insisted that sickness spread through bad air. Summer in London was notorious for its pungent stench, a mix of overflowing cesspools, horse manure, and smoky factories. Perfumes, disinfectants, and herbal sachets were used to mask the smells, but the real causes of illness, like bacteria and viruses, remained a mystery for much of the century. Laundry day was an ordeal in every household, but not just because of hard labor. The methods were surprising by today's standards. Ammonia, borax, and even human or animal urine were all used to whiten and deodorize clothing. Fullers, professional laundry workers, would soak garments in these solutions before pounding, rinsing, and hanging them to dry in the smoky city air. Personal grooming was also going through a transformation. Toothbrushes and tooth powders were available, but mostly for the well-off. The poor often made do with a cloth or chewed on sticks and rags to clean their teeth. Early indoor plumbing arrived in the form of water closets, primitive toilets that often drained into brick-lined cesspools beneath the house. These modern conveniences helped, but they brought their own risks, with unpleasant smells and the ever-present danger of leaks. Hair care was a point of pride. Victorians concocted their own shampoos using eggs, beer, or herbs, always striving for glossy locks. Cosmetics were popular, though not always safe. Arsenic and lead found their way into creams and powders in the pursuit of flawless, pale skin. Perhaps most revolutionary was the gradual public discussion of women's hygiene needs. For the first time, feminine products became commercially available and advice columns began to address menstruation. A step toward breaking old taboos. The world-famous mouthwash Listerine actually got its start way back in 1879. But forget about fresh breath. At first, Listerine was invented as a surgical antiseptic, designed to clean wounds in operating rooms. It wasn't until much later that the company pivoted, transforming Listerine into the minty rinse millions use today for oral hygiene. The Civil War, disease and sanitation on the battlefield. The American Civil War is often remembered for its epic battles and tales of bravery, but for soldiers on both sides, the most relentless enemy wasn't always armed with a rifle. Disease and poor sanitation claimed more lives than any bullet ever could, turning military camps into breeding grounds for misery. As thousands of young men from cities and farms flooded into makeshift camps, the conditions quickly became unbearable. Tents were packed tightly together, offering little protection from the elements or the stench of unwashed bodies. Fresh uniforms were a point of pride at first, but laundry facilities were scarce, and it wasn't long before clothing became grimy and lice-ridden. Soldiers often had no choice but to share not just tents but socks and undergarments, a perfect recipe for spreading skin infections and parasites. Waste disposal posed a constant challenge. Latrines, if they existed at all, were often hastily dug and rarely maintained. Many soldiers, exhausted or simply unaware, relieved themselves wherever they could, leading to contaminated water supplies and the rapid spread of diseases like dysentery, typhoid, and cholera. Clean water was precious, and many drank from the same streams used for bathing and laundry, further fueling outbreaks of illness. Despite official orders encouraging weekly baths, the realities of camp life made regular washing nearly impossible. After days or weeks in the field, a soldier might only have a muddy river or rainwater for washing, if he was lucky. Food was another battleground. Rations were meager, often spoiled, and rarely included fresh fruits or vegetables. Malnutrition left men weak and more vulnerable to disease. Wounds received in battle brought their own dangers. The concept of antiseptic surgery was still years away, and infection was almost inevitable after even minor injuries. Amputation became a grimly routine procedure, seen as the only hope to stop infection from spreading. Doctors and nurses did their best, but without knowledge of germs, every operation was a roll of the dice. The scale of disease and death in the camps shocked the nation and led to a growing push for better public health practices. Reformers advocated for improved sanitation, organized nursing, and stricter standards of cleanliness, changes that would shape the future of American medicine long after the last shots were fired. For many, the true legacy of the Civil War wasn't just written in blood, but in the drive to make military and civilian life safer and more humane. The Wild West, hygiene on the frontier. Life on the American frontier was a test of endurance, not just against the elements or outlaws, but also against dirt, dust, and all the little miseries of daily survival. Forget any notion of fresh linens or sparkling washrooms. Out west, staying clean was a daily challenge, and for many pioneers, hygiene was often little more than a hope. Dust was everywhere. It drifted in on the wind, coated clothes and skin, and found its way into every meal. Settlers and cowboys quickly learned that no matter how hard you tried, the battle against grime was never truly won. Bathing was a rare luxury, especially in remote settlements. When water was available, families might share the same tub, reheating the water for each new bather until it was more mud than bath. Soap, if you had it, was usually homemade from animal fat and lye, though people also relied on natural remedies, like soapweed, a wild plant used by some for washing hair. Toilets as we know them today were nearly unheard of. Most folks made do with outhouses, simple wooden shacks with a pit below, or just headed for the nearest patch of woods or prairie. Toilet paper didn't exist. Instead, people reached for whatever was handy: corn cobs, leaves, or old scraps of newspaper. Privacy was rare, but practicality ruled the day. Sleeping quarters didn't offer much relief from discomfort. Mattresses, if they could be called that, were often bags stuffed with hay or straw. With time, these beds became havens for lice, fleas, and bedbugs, which could make for long, restless nights. Getting rid of pests was an uphill battle, fought with boiling water, strong sunlight, and a great deal of patience. Water for drinking, cooking, and cleaning was a resource to be guarded closely. Rivers, streams, and wells were lifelines, but they were also easily contaminated, especially when laundry, dishwashing, and bathing all happened in the same place. Waterborne diseases were common threats in frontier towns and camps. Out on the frontier, survival demanded creativity and grit. Hygiene was rarely perfect, but it was always a reflection of the land's challenges and the hard-won resourcefulness of the people who called it home. Out of all these wild hygiene stories, which one did you find the most unbelievable? Titanic, luxury, class, and hygiene at sea. When the RMS Titanic set sail in 1912, it was more than just a ship. It was a floating city promising the height of luxury and technological innovation. For many, boarding the Titanic meant stepping into a world of elegance, where even hygiene and comfort were designed to dazzle. But, as with so much else in history, your experience on board depended a lot on where you stood in the social order. First-class passengers lived in opulence. Their cabins rivaled the finest hotel suites, complete with running water, flushing toilets, and even bathtubs, unheard of luxuries for travelers at sea. The Turkish bath was a marvel, offering steam rooms and massage tables for those looking to unwind after a formal dinner. Attendants and personal servants were always on hand to lay out fresh linens or help guests change for the next event. Maintaining cleanliness and comfort was an art, performed by an invisible army of stewards and maids who worked around the clock to polish every surface and keep the dining rooms and lounges spotless. Second-class travelers also fared well. They enjoyed comfortable cabins, well-kept bathrooms, and access to sanitary facilities that would put many hotels of the era to shame. Public restrooms were regularly cleaned, and hot water was available for bathing, a small but meaningful touch for families making long journeys across the ocean. Life was much different below deck. Third-class or steerage passengers, mostly immigrants dreaming of a better life, lived in shared cabins and made do with communal sinks and simple toilets. Before even stepping aboard, these passengers underwent health inspections to limit the risk of infectious disease, an early reminder of the public health concerns that haunted large groups of travelers. Privacy was limited and amenities were basic, but for many, the conditions still surpassed what they'd left behind. Regardless of class, the Titanic was equipped with a fully staffed hospital and a ship's doctor, ready to care for passengers in need. Strict cleaning regimens helped prevent the spread of illness, and the ship's kitchens worked day and night to serve meals with gleaming cutlery and spotless plates. Even pets were pampered. First-class travelers brought dogs, cats, and birds, who stayed in their own onboard kennels. Beneath all this polish, the Titanic's hygiene standards reflected both the promise and the limits of early 20th century technology. For the wealthy, it was a golden age of comfort. For others, it was a step up from hardship, but not yet a ticket to luxury. Hygiene in space, challenges and solutions in zero gravity. Living in space might sound like science fiction, but for astronauts, even the simplest routines, like staying clean, turn into complicated challenges. There's no gravity to help water flow, so traditional showers are out of the question. Instead, astronauts rely on rinseless body wipes, a splash of water from a pouch, and no-rinse shampoo to keep themselves fresh. For shaving, special razors with vacuum attachments capture stray hairs before they can float away. Going to the bathroom in zero gravity is another adventure. Space toilets use airflow and suction to direct waste into sealed containers. Nothing can be left floating around. Used water, including urine, is filtered and recycled into drinking water, maximizing every precious drop. Laundry isn't possible, so clothing is worn repeatedly until it must be discarded. Every detail is carefully planned, because in a closed environment, odors and germs can quickly become a problem. Regular cleaning, strict hygiene kits, and powerful ventilation systems help keep the International Space Station habitable. Far from Earth, astronauts rely on creativity, technology, and teamwork, proving that even among the stars, good hygiene is never out of this world. From ancient bathhouses to astronauts scrubbing up in zero gravity, the story of staying clean has always shaped our lives. Did a detail surprise you, or do you know a forgotten hygiene trick from history? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear. If you enjoyed this trip through time, stick with Past Not Past for more fascinating stories.